More than 300 years ago, the first pioneers crossed the oceans to a new world. A promise called them. The promise of a land where a man could build his own house, farm his own acres, raise his children in freedom. They carved from the wilderness an empire of agriculture and industry. They set for themselves new and higher standards of living. And yet, in one of the great river valleys of America, something went wrong.
When you look at Franklin Roosevelt's assessment of the condition of the country in 1932 and 33, he identifies the South as the #1 economic problem in the country. And the Appalachian region itself was probably the most heavily affected areas in the South. It was probably the poorest, most isolated part of the South. Very little electricity. Folks were living in conditions that were very much like mid-19th century conditions. You know, when the sun went down, they went to bed.
The struggle to scratch a bare living from the reluctant soil.
If you look at the farmers, you know, they're going through these droughts in the 20s and early 30s, and they're having serious erosion problems in the valleys up and down the river, so you'd go from a drought to a heavy rain.
Destruction from the sky.
Without the flood control that comes with TVA, you know, you have these massive destructive floods that come out of the river basin, or river valleys that come out of the Appalachian Mountains. Rivers like the Hiwassee and the Ocoee, you know, they flood, and then of course all the creeks that feed into those rivers. And so you'd have this cycle of drought, then serious destructive floods, a lot of loss of life in these valleys up and down the Tennessee River, in the Tennessee River Valley. It's a very serious economic problem, and it's a serious safety issue. We are at the Chickamauga Dam on the Tennessee River. It's a Tennessee Valley Authority project from 1940. The dam was dedicated in 1940 by Franklin Roosevelt, a part of a large network of dams that were built up and down the Tennessee River from between 1933 and the early 1940s.
An act was passed creating the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. President Roosevelt told the nation that the project would set an example of planning not for this generation alone, but for all the generations to come.
The Tennessee Valley Authority was one of the early New Deal projects. It was really a project and a concept that had been under consideration for some years before Franklin Roosevelt became president. Frank Norris, a Nebraska senator, was looking to help improve the quality of life in the Tennessee River Valley, to bring flood control, to generate some electrical power, and to improve the lives of the people living in the Tennessee River Valley. It's one of the poorest regions in the country at the end of the 1920s, and it's a serious attempt at remaking the social and economic lives of the people living in the River Valley, from Knoxville all the way to the Ohio River. And Chattanooga had been struggling with flooding problems, and this is a town that had become the center of the National Railroad network in the 1850s. This is a town that had become an important manufacturing city in the South, and gosh, in the nation for that matter, in the late 19th century. But until this dam goes in, until this dam is shut up in 1940, the city experiences massive flooding. You know, there's always the dramatic stories of the 1867 flood, when the military bridge that the U.S. Army had built during the Civil War was washed away. Floodwaters all the way back up to where the National Cemetery is today, which is about 4.5 miles from the riverfront. So with this project, those problems were finally taken care of. If you think of federal projects that have done good for people and done you know, almost unmitigated good, this is probably the project that you would hold up. If you think about the changes in people's lives, the transitions that happen just in a very short period of time. I mean, imagine being a farmer up in the northern reaches of Hamilton County and living in a 19th century style of chopping wood and drawing water out of the well. And in the course of 8 or 10 years, you have electric lights and you have electric pumps. And it completely transforms the way that people experienced everyday life in the valley.
You've seen the dams, but they're only part of the plan. The rest of it is up to you. The TVA was created for you. We want you to use it.
Dams really are certainly a major part of the project itself. But education programs, beyond the rural electrification programs, you're also seeing educators going out from TVA who are teaching people how to use new irrigation systems, teaching them how to use electricity to pump water to their fields, teaching them about fertilizers that are being manufactured in plants that are going on up or are being built up and down the river, and thinking about modernizing agricultural practices. And in some ways that may be the bigger transition that happens. I mean, certainly the dams themselves create some stability and some regularity in the lives of the people who are living along these rivers that flooded over and over and over again. But when you get that experience regularized, and then you begin to think about how to farm in a scientific basis and use fertilizer and use electricity to irrigate the fields themselves is a really important impact that TVA had. TVA was putting up in all the towns up and down the river. They were putting together demonstration kitchens for people to learn how to use electric appliances in their kitchens. And it's those are little. They seem like little things, but when people are making that, this is a big jump. This is a huge acceleration. And the way that education went hand in hand with the infrastructure that was being built, I think is as important as what was being built in the dams and the other facilities.
The dam builders, 200,000 of them in all, 4,000 on this one project.
When you listen to some of the old timers talking about TVA, and not only they talk about the opportunities that came through electricity, but they also talk about the opportunities that came through the jobs that came with TVA. And as a federal agency, there are many opportunities that are open to African Americans through TVA that would have not come to them otherwise. So you think about upward mobility of a very poor African American community in this region. It's a backwards, poor place without TVA. What happens if there is no TVA? Well, certainly the flood problems continue on. Certainly the everyday lives of the people who are affected by the introduction of inexpensive electricity don't change in those dramatic ways that they did in the 1930s, the 1940s. I think the area remains stuck in a cycle of poverty that would have been very, very difficult to pull out of. I think that the scientific know-how that comes with TVA helps farmers begin to think differently about the way they're using their land, about fertilizers and about irrigation. It remains stuck in 1872.